when Gaddafi fell, Gaddafi had been training for years another group of herding, somewhat transient, Berber-speaking people called the Tuareg, amongst many others. Gaddafi, his hands were in everything. And so if you look in the wars in Sudan, if you look in the wars in Chad, if you look in the wars anywhere north of the equator where there's
Northern Ireland,
Northern Ireland, Gaddafi falls and all of a sudden like SA-7s are in the hands of Tuaregs, which has never happened. Stuff starts going crazy. Millions of guns are just unleashed. And the Tuaregs are like, all right. The Tuareg, being a nomadic group, being of a different skin color and background than the people in the central government, have basically spent a long time doing this complicated negotiation for resources. In their case, literal financial resources with the central government, especially in Bamako, in Mali, which is the big keystone country in the Western Sahel. The Malian government is basically like, unless you guys rebel, you don't get a lot of resources because we're corrupt and France is going to back us no matter what happens anyway. And they're a democracy for much of this time, but they're kind of a corrupt oligarchical system that looks like a democracy. These are not real democracies. And the Tuareg's way of getting stuff from them is normally to rebel. And in 2011, they said, we're going to rebel unless you do X and X and X. And I don't know precisely what those were. And the then Malian president, he was like, I'm not going to do it. The jihadist groups who have used the Tuareg as transit guys, people who know the desert, and as clients, essentially. They have a ton of money for their smuggling. Al-Qaeda and the Tuaregs team up, and they're briefly an unstoppable force, and they sweep towards Bamako, nearly take it, are only driven back with the help of the French. But this is the start of a war that looked like it was won as soon as French warplanes started bombing caravans, and actually, progressively, first France lost it, and now, honestly, Russia may lose it, and this is a tough team to beat. If you go to the central Sahara where the Tuaregs live, these are people who kept speaking Berber. These are people who were like, no, we're not even going to get colonized by the Arabs. Forget the French. At a certain point, that becomes its own inertia, I would argue, with regard to the Tuareg. You've kept it going this long. It becomes your raison d'etre to keep it going. The Tuareg project of building this country called Azawad, where people would speak Amazigh and Berber languages and live freely in the desert, building a nation state on the Tuareg model, it would involve cutting off northern Mali, parts of Niger, southern Algeria. Candidly, I don't think that'll ever be achieved. It almost feels dated to me. We don't live in a world where you have to do that anymore, or where that kind of state building would be that relevant. One guy who led them into the alliance with the jihadists played with fire, and they really got burned. They took a lot of heat when that counterinsurgency came in. It was not good for them, and they didn't want to take Bamako in the first place. The Tuaregs have no interest in Bamako. They have no interest in anything down there, and it made them look bad. At one point, you had guys proclaiming independence, which was a terrible look. Sent to the international community this idea that we cannot be worked with. We are crazies. Now, if you talk to Tuareg leaders in the MNLA, all these different, they have a million groups, CMA, I can't even keep track of them. You talk to leaders in those, they are very practical. What happened was, to some degree, they were so good at appeasing the French and saying, look, we are reason. We are not the problem. The jihadists are the problem. The French believed them. And a lot of Malians got really mad about this because the French really stopped prosecuting the war against the Tuaregs. And they gave them their mythical, people always call it their redoubt in the north of Mali, this city of Kidal. There was a 2015 peace agreement brokered by Algeria between Bamako and the Tuareg. There was a peace agreement. The Tuaregs aren't the problem. Leave, they can have Kidal do their thing. They're good. We're going to fight the jihadists, who increasingly became Pogue, young, disaffected herding guys who were having conflicts over grazing land with their neighbors and who were driven into the arms of the jihad by persecution from the Malian army, frequently by outright extortion from the jihadists who would just come to a village and say, we're either going to kill you or all the young men join us. And the young men are like, cool. And so the Malian government's war became one of really kind of like brutal suppression of the Pogue. And it became one where they couldn't really get to the Tuaregs. Eventually, the Wagner group comes in, which has pioneered this model of backing states in counterinsurgencies. It takes them a while, but eventually they figure out how to do the desert warfare stuff. And they started just by massacring Pogue. They'd go to villages, round up everyone, kill all the men over 14, bring helicopter gunships in, just strafe everything, kill people. And then they figured out the drone warfare thing against the Tuareg and swept north and basically retook everything. They retook Kidal. They hung the Wagner death head over the fort there. They made it clear it was them. For a while, it looked like, okay, that's it. The Tuareg left. They didn't fire a shot. They gave them the city. They fled. 70% of the city's population fled overnight. Like, they just went into the desert, disappeared. And I spent a lot of time talking to military officers while I was there this last time. And I was like, wow, that sucks. Like, after all this time, like, they kind of lost that war, like, in a week. And they were all like, yeah, just wait. Just wait. The staying power of Russians in Mali, to them, and I think this is right, the Russians are there because the gold mines that have been discovered in this region send a ton of hard currency to the Russian state at a time when the Russian state really, really needs hard currency. They don't care about Mali, and it's not in their traditional strategic realm. The French, even, where it is in their traditional strategic realm, lost their will to fight. They lost that. The Russians are going to lose it a lot quicker. And then we'll just go back to square one. If you actually look at a map of conflict in Africa, north of the equator, almost every war has some component of nomadic herding peoples, because it turns out that you can't just like draw a bunch of nation states and get rid of these traditional ways of life. You got to either kill everybody or figure out a way to incorporate people. And that did not happen. And now there's this sort of like weird resurgence of nomadism and traditional modes of smuggling and trafficking that have financed a lot of this stuff. It's weird. And you have to face the realities of people who want to be free and are free and are hard to control.
They see the Sahara as a nation, a source of identity and culture, the clothes they wear, the open space they long for.